All right, so next up, we've got Clelia Bertelli from LlamaIndex, who is going to talk about vector databases and how they can power the workflow engineering for context-rich AI systems. Go ahead and give her a big round of applause, please.
Hi. Oh, okay. I think you can hear me now. So, vector databases power workflow engineering for context-rich AI systems. That's a very big title. And before we dive into the presentation, I just want to give myself a quick introduction. For those who don't know me, which is probably the majority of people, I am an open source engineer at LlamaIndex. I work a lot in the AI space, but I also do some stuff in my free time, mostly trying to break out in web development and front-end full stack development. So without much further ado, I would like to start with a simple question that maybe some of you might be asking themselves right now. What is a workflow? So we have two things here. We have an agent and a workflow. So these are two things that at first might seem similar, but there is actually a fundamental difference. With an agent, you get what we call agency, or what I like to call autonomy. With a workflow, what you get is automation. And not only automation, because obviously autonomy with the agent brings automation, but you get controlled, guardrailed automation. With a workflow, you can control the flow. You can control the steps. You can control the events and the data that flow in and out. So obviously, agent is unconstrained, and workflow is a set of steps that are triggered by events. So this is the definition of event-driven workflow, which we were talking about, that is basically able to carry out one or multiple tasks in a guardrailed, automated way. So this is basically what a workflow is. And once we're clear on this definition, we can pretty much gone through, I would say, this list, we can understand why workflows are a little bit better than agents for building knowledge systems. Because obviously, when you have an agent, you have obviously automation, you have more independence from the agent, but you don't have as much reliability as you get with a workflow. So you cannot build a real production-grade system with only an agent. You need some kind of guardrails, you need some kind of control over the flow, control over what you're building. So that is exactly what we are building at LlamaIndex. So we are building workflows that are event-driven, as I was saying before, but they are also stateful, meaning that all the state and all the operations that are going on through the workflow are available at any time, at any step of the workflow. So you can access them at any step of the workflow. And they are durable. They can persist through time, through runs. You can collect information. We'll talk about that in a second. They come with async first, because we love asynchronous Python and asynchronous TypeScript. And they are stepwise. So they are divided in steps. So you can control every step and you can atomize the tasks. So you can divide them in small little tasks that are able basically to carry out all sorts of things. And obviously we have two extras that are very good. We have observability and human in the loop out of the box. And we also have cyclic and linear workflows with support also for branching and concurrent step execution. So we have basically everything you would like to have in a workflow, but if you're not satisfied with that, you can always open an issue and we will find you and find a solution for what you want. So obviously, with workflows, as we said, you have steps, you have everything you want, and what is very interesting, our workflows are plug and play. So you can plug in whatever tool you need, LlamaIndex Quadrant, Superlinked, Gemini, Arise, whatever. You can plug it in at any step, as an external resource, and it will work within the workflow. So obviously, this opens a lot of possibilities for you, because once you can connect anything, you have external dependencies, you have things external that might not be so clear and obvious to your workflow. So these comes, in this sense, useful when that this comes as a problem and we have a useful solution, which are vector databases, which this morning I learned maybe vector search engine is better, to do what is basically memory management and state management. So you can really build a knowledge system that leverages not only the internal state of your, I would say, workflow, but also all the external tools that you can connect with the workflow, and it manages all, let's say, the dependencies, the external dependencies, external resources, and internal, I would say, the dependencies and variables that go on within your workflow. So we will be exploring two topics today. One is state management, and one is memory management. So let's start with the first one, state management. What is state? State, as we said before, is the internal representation of everything's going on in the workflow. Actually, with LlamaIndex, you can also have external representation of everything that's going on in workflows. And basically, you can store things like, for example, the original input, the intermediate step, the results that you get, and then you can collect them at the end. But we have a big problem. State is hardly linked with the workflow that you're running, with the single run. And so what you need to do is have some kind of persistency of the state. And how do you manage the persistence of the state? Well, you can use a normal database, but since we are spicy engineers, we want to use Quadrant. We want to use vector databases. And there's obviously there are obviously interesting use cases. For example, you can scan this QR code if you're interested in seeing code live. This is a notebook that you can run, but you can also see the results of the notebook at this link. And basically, what we are going to see, I hope you all got it, what we are going to see in this workflow is this. So we have our input question, and the question retrieves from a Quadrant database. And what it retrieves are state from the past run. Let's say run 8, run 25, run 47. The state stores the question from the input and embeds that. And so you can retrieve directly the question. And with the question, within the payload that Quadrant offers, it's my favorite by far characteristic feature by Quadrant. So you can retrieve the whole state with the whole state of the workflow with the payload. And you can inject that whole state as a context to the next step of the workflow. So that instead of running the workflow or every time without knowledge of previous runs, you can run the workflow, inject this thing, and the LLM that would first say, okay, is this state relevant? Is the things that we retrieved are the things that we retrieved relevant? And the LLM could say, okay, this is relevant. We don't need to search any more information. We don't need to do any more steps. We can produce a response based solely on this state context. Or if the state is not relevant enough, or you don't have any state because it's the first run, you first go to your MCP, OpenAI, whatever, we connect it with DeepFiki, and you search, you embed the question, you embed the vector store, I would say you embed in the vector store, you upload the state as a payload to the question, and in next run, that state will be available to your vector, to your workflow. Sorry, too many W's and V's. So this is the first use case. So this is the first, state management. And that is very exciting, I know. But there is something even more exciting, which is memory management. Memory, as we all know, is something that we as humans are very proud of, but also agents can have memory. And memory is something very important, especially for workflows, because obviously workflows are self-contained, and it's very good if they can remember what they did, and especially if an agent or an LLM inside of the workflow can remember what it did before. And so For example, in our memory, a memory that we at LlamaIndex implemented, you can store a lot of things. You can store facts, you can store long-term memory, but you can also store short-term information or static information or long-term information, more dynamic, and you can retrieve that information. Our memory is based for the short-term memory on our relational database, SQLite, and for the long-term memory on vector databases or vector search engines, if you prefer. And in this case, we're going to see how you can use Quadrant as a memory for managing clients. So this is basically the workflow that we have. And the workflow that we have here and that we have here is memory-based. So the first thing that we do is starting from the question of our user. And if you are following along with the notebook, which maybe I will put here again, if you didn't have, maybe you didn't have time. So if you're following along with the notebook, which I really recommend for this one, because it's a very exciting use case, because it's customer management and customer support. If you're following along, you will see that first thing is retrieve from memory. Okay, the first event is the retrieval from memory. And after the first event, after the retrieval from memory, what we get is that we first have an LLM that tells us, is this relevant? No. If this is not relevant, we go and I would say handle the query from the customer in a normal way, and we create new memories that we insert in the vector database. If this is relevant, by the way, we can skip this step or perform it nevertheless, but to create new memories, but we can also skip this step and go directly through the last one. So imagine we have, for example, a server that has all the informations, orders, payments, complaints, and our authenticated user. So to every authenticated user, we have an authenticated session, has basically their orders, their payments, their complaints. So this can retrieve, this can create an API request and go to the server and ask, okay, this user has order ID, I think, and in the example we use ID hello world. Can you give me the status of the order? And the server will respond back with the status of the order. And then the same, let's say the order has been delivered, and now the same customer wants to know what's the status of their order again after 1 or 2 days. And what happens is that if they access the database, if they access our workflow, again, what will happen is that our memory will be hit, because obviously they already asked about the order, they already asked about the order with the same ID. The memory will be hit, and the memory obviously will be irrelevant because we already have this thing. And so they don't even have to provide, I would say, the order number, the order ID. They can just say, well, how is my order? What is the status of my order? And the LLM would remember that the order was ID hello world. And we'll go and say, okay, well then let's skip through the second part, let's skip to the middle part, and let's go directly to the server and ask a request about what is the status of order ID hello world. And that is great. So what we get is basically, we get out the status of the order, and maybe in this case, I think, in the notebook has released, so delivered. So that is basically what you can do with workflows and memory management, with workflows and state management. These are the two things I would say that are most important for like use cases that I see daily, and the two things you can use databases for. Oh. Okay. So what is the take-home message here? So the take-home message here are two. If you combine workflows and vector databases for state management and memory management, you have basically an easier life scaling because you have faster access to information. You have stateful workflows that know what they've been doing, what they are doing, and who knows, maybe in the future, what they will do. And so also that you can reduce hallucinations and information loss with memory and state, because obviously they already did, and if they did successfully, your failure rate will drop because previous success can influence current success. And finally, in general, circling back to our title, you can create context-rich guardrail and, what's most important, production-ready systems, AI systems, to basically scale and iterate fast. So that's basically everything I have for you. So you can go and find LlamaIndex on GitHub. You can find LlamaIndex workflows. Please star us because we have a lot of things coming up, a lot of features. And you can try also our very good parsing and extraction services at Llama Cloud. And that was everything. Thank you very much for your attention.